internal audit of the election. And if you can't demonstrate chain of custody, you can't demonstrate the integrity of the election. So that it has been certified. I know there's some people potentially pursuing some writs of mandamus, which would actually put a stay on that certification. I haven't heard that officially has been done yet. They got 48 hours to do that. The next step is, and now we get into the possibility of having some Senate and House hearings on what we experience in regards to voter fraud. We really haven't had our day in court. All we've done is shuffle a few affidavits to some judges, and there's been no back and forth or interviews of witnesses or anything like that you'd normally see. We might get closer to that in context of some joint hearings in Michigan in the Michigan State Legislature. And short of that, it's going to go into a discussion. The big milestone, frankly, nationwide is December 14th, where all the electors are supposed to be assigned in the Electoral College. And if we don't have resolution at that point in time, then we may get into a discussion of the 12th Amendment and the decision as to who the next president is by the U.S. House of Representatives. And before everybody who's got an R next to their name gets really nervous about that, each state only gets one vote, and it's determined essentially on the basis of the relative number of Republicans and Democrats in your congressional delegation. And by that calculation, Republicans have a 26 to 24 seat lead or vote lead in that context, and Donald Trump would be the president of the United States for the next 4 years.
Wow. Okay. That certainly stirred stuff up.
Yeah.
You broke some. We broke some things here talking with you, and you saw some algorithms and some situations the last time we talked. Let me just ask you this: did something happen in this election? Was there some shenanigans, I think was the word that was used? Did something happen?
Absolutely. And it's not just election day operations that people focus on. We saw plenty of evidence of games being played, good old Chicago style politics there. And when you see the tabulator computers connected to the internet, that's definitely a red flag. And when you see the vote flipping appear real time on stations that are getting feeds from the New York Times, that's a concern. But I would submit that there's also concern about what happened before Election Day. And there's a test that's supposed to be performed on all the equipment called a public accuracy test. And depending on how you configure that test and how you set it up, you can tee it up for a bunch of loopholes that are going to be designed to be exploited through the election process, where they'll scan a ballot, and if it meets a certain criteria for a certain scenario that they had pre-planned, it automatically go off and flip the vote to another candidate. So you got to be concerned about that as well. And I don't know how much discipline was applied to that public accuracy test in this election, not just in Michigan, but all across the country.
I don't want to get too deep because the things you've discovered, the people you're working with, the affidavits, and, I don't want you to disclose anything, and I know you won't. You have to have proof of this, though, don't you?
Yeah.
With the algorithms. Is there any type of proof? Can I ask that?
Yes, there is. And here's the challenge we've got, though, because you got to get it framed in a way that holds up in a court case. We don't want this just to go off and prove that we're right and then move on. I mean, we got to get this to a point where we actually get a judge or a group of judges nodding their head saying, yes, we totally agree with your evidence, and this is sufficient to go off and reinvestigate or maybe revote, maybe justify the reallocation of the electors by the legislature, et cetera. It's got to be of such magnitude that we can make our case so clearly that it's easy for everybody to get on board and say this is it. Here's a challenge we've got. The people have been behind this exercise, and I would submit that it is sedition. What we've got has all the fingerprints of somebody trying to undermine our system of government. When you're trying to mess with our elections, this is the same thing as the CIA here going in and trying to undermine the elections in Peru or in Venezuela, right? It's the same thing is happening, except we believe this is more of an inside job with some outside help. And so they have the picture of this puzzle already. They've got the box that had all the puzzle pieces in it. They're looking at that, and we don't have that box. What we have is we started putting the edges together. We got all the edges to this puzzle pulled together. I'm very confident on that. Right now, we're getting to the point where we're identifying individual pieces inside it and where they go. And we want to make sure before this is brought to a crescendo, if you will, that all those pieces are assembled. Now, if we get out in front right now and push out all this evidence, as people are saying, where's the evidence? Well, we got tons of affidavits that are already public. They're not even looking at those, right? Go focus on those for a little bit. We're knitting together all the rest of the pieces of evidence so that we can have, when we have our day in court, we don't have to worry about them going off and trying to discredit everybody based on a couple of sketchy affidavits or whatever, people that maybe didn't understand the process or anything else. We're making sure that we're focusing on the quality ones, not going off and letting them, pick and choose which ones they want to go off and exploit and say, listen, these guys, none of them have credibility because this guy said 2 + 2 = 5 instead of 2 + 2 = 4. You know what I mean?
So what's the day of court look like? What's that day in court? Is there a day that this is all going to come together and there is a day in court? Because I believe the American people deserve that.
They do. And right now we've had just kind of toss over rulings. Judge Kenny here in Wayne County did a horrible job from my perspective of evaluating the evidence before him. And he took one person's testimony at the exclusion of all the others. So we never really had a back and forth discussion where we could actually interview their witnesses. The closest we're going to get to that, I believe, is if the Senate and the House in Michigan have joint hearings where we can actually ask some questions and go back and forth and have a reasonable discussion instead of the usual media grenades, if you will, where you just lob it over the fence based on some assertions. You never have a chance to question the person who made that assertion. So that's the first step. And then we hope as we get into discussions with the Supreme Court and not just the Michigan Supreme Court, but there's some cases that we believe are going to be going at the U.S. Supreme Court, then we'll have our day in court there as well.
Wow. We'd like you to stay with us. We're going to go through some of the other news stories with us, but we'd love to have you stay with us and chime in at any point as you would. Here's a story from the UPI. Even with election challenges and court cases still in the work, on Monday, the General Services Administration Administrator, Emily Murphy, said she will release funds to the Biden transition team. She said that $7.3 million in resources and services are available for the presidential transition, and the GSA is an independent federal agency. Wait a minute. Is there such a thing as an independent federal? Okay, sorry, I crossed the line right there. It just made me think of that for a second.
Yeah.
But this is part of what should happen.
Yeah,
but this doesn't mean that the president quit.
Not at all. In fact, he tweeted out either last night or this morning. I'll read the very last part of his tweet. He said, "We are moving full speed ahead. We will never concede to fake ballots and Dominion." So he's not changed his stance whatsoever. He's still moving ahead with the legal.
So when you heard that, that's not him conceding or that it's over. It's
absolutely
releasing money.
Absolutely true. Let's go back to Georgia. The president's request for another recount in Georgia got support from the state's 2 U.S. senators. On Monday, state officials gave the go-ahead for that recount to start today. Both Kelly Loeffler and David Perdue backed the president's request for a recount where signatures are matched and verified. In fact, in a statement, Perdue said anything less than a recount involving signatures would not be a full and transparent recount. The governor of Georgia is also backing the president's request. However, now it appears because the signature for Georgia ballots is on the outer envelope and the ballot and the ballot envelope are separated for privacy reasons, there'll be no way to verify signatures. And that's a problem, isn't it, Senator?
Yes, it is. And so we have a similar problem in Michigan dealing with unbalanced precincts. If it's unbalanced, meaning that the number of people who were issued ballots in that particular precinct does not equal the number of ballots that were counted, then it's unbalancing. It's not subject to a recount. So, this recount is not a panacea. It doesn't solve all the problems that we have here. And I keep harping on the term chain of custody. If you don't maintain that chain of custody all the way from that qualified voter file all the way down to the vote tally itself, if you don't maintain that chain of custody, you have no reason to believe in the integrity of the election.
We're still looking at returns coming out. Not every House seat is decided, believe it or not. An upstate New York congressional race remains neck and neck with a 100 vote margin last reported. As the New York Post is reporting, one of the latest issues is, here we go again, mail-in ballots cast by deceased voters. Now, it looks like the election will come down to state judge rule when he rules on disputed absentee and affidavit ballots. The race between Democratic Representative Anthony Berdenzi and Republican Claudia Tenney will determine who represents New York in the 22nd Congressional District. So there we go again. Mail-in ballots were really just one leg of that table, isn't it, this year? Because you had that, and then you had voter flips, and it seems like everything coming together instead of just one thing. So interesting.
Yeah. Well, as you heard the senator say a few moments ago, after some controversy over what two Republican members of the Michigan State Board of Canvassers would do, they finally decided to certify the results of the presidential election. The final vote was 3-0 with one abstention, calling Joe Biden the winner. Supporters of President Trump had asked the panel to hold off on the vote for another 2 weeks to provide time for the votes to be audited. Regardless, the president's legal team said it's not giving up there in Michigan. And Senator, I'll go back to you on this one. You said you testified yesterday in front of those folks. What did you say, and how did they receive you?
Well, I highlighted that the chain of custody was broken, and their purpose as canvassers ensured that all the election records were satisfactorily completed. And if the chain of custody is broken, you can't do that, not in good conscience. And I highlighted a couple of key links that were broken in Michigan. Number one, that first link, and that if this link is broken, everything downstream is broken as well. In Michigan, there were 8.1 million registered voters. The only problem with that is that there's only 7.8 million eligible to vote in the state of Michigan. That's a 300,000 vote gap.
Wow.
And so that's one big problem. And I highlighted that to the State Board of Canvassers. I also highlighted that in the city of Ann Arbor alone, it was something like 119,000 people are registered, except there were only 92,000 that were eligible to vote. We've got a case where even in the official Wayne County Board of Canvassers report, they had 172,000 votes associated with the absentee vote tally that had 0 registered voters associated with them. So in other words, they had a lot of ballots, they had a lot of votes, but they were not connected officially for the official results to any voters at all. And yet they decided to go off and certify it. So, and then I highlighted too, the other key link is around vote tallies. And I testified and gave them evidence on why, that the tabulator computers were connected to the internet, the Detroit AB Counting Board.
Yeah.
Connected to the internet, and we have proof that there's some backup overflow errors that indicate an attempt to query a database from a tabulator. Well, why the heck is a tabulator going off and doing queries out to a database unless it's connected to some other database? We have proof that it was connected to the internet, and that blows up the whole integrity of the vote tally link. So we made that assertion, and they chose to ignore it, and so it was a very frustrating day for me yesterday. Let me just put it this way. My hand hurt quite a bit when I heard the vote because I took it out of my desktop. And
Wow.
Just no integrity.
Well, sir, first of all, thank you for doing that. Thank you for standing up to the people of Michigan and the people of the United States. You may know this or not. Do all 4 of those, did that have to be a unanimous vote to certify in Michigan?
No, all they needed was 3 out of the 4. And you
So
saw
the
the one
one-
abstention.
Yeah.
It's whatever. It was, I'm not going to be too upset with them because when my time ran out, I was the first person, by the way, that they invoked the 3-minute rule on limits to the testimony. They made sure that they had me constrained when I got up there because I could have talked a lot about more than 2 links, but he actually gave me an opportunity to complete my statements by asking a question. So I appreciate that.
That is great. All right. Well, there's a lot of people protesting about curfews, but also about Stop the Steal. John Smith, our Victory correspondent in California, covered the Stop the Steal rally this weekend in California. Watch this.
Hey, Greg, I'm in Yorba Linda, California today, and the election may be over, but the support for President Trump is not. Why are you guys here today?
We're here to support our president and to expose the hypocrisy of this election.
We're against tyranny. We're for our actual God-given liberties and freedoms, and we need to preserve those.
He had so many more votes in Pennsylvania. All of a sudden, you wake up the next morning and those are gone. So it's just all around, it wasn't fair.
And every single state in which I filed them would have to undo their certifications because it was just that bad.
Got small businesses that are losing their livelihood, losing their purpose and their passion. When we lose small chains like Soup Plantation and other small businesses because of this nonsense, we've got people bailing out on our state because they can't afford to live here anymore. And when he's siphoning the gas tax to use for his pet projects, we have a problem.
And I'm here because I not only support my president, but I support my savior, and his platform is the one that aligns with my pro-life stance, my just pro-freedom of speech, my pro-opportunity to just express my love for God and give other people their rights to express whoever they worship, but I don't want mine taken away from me.
We're out here to let our president know that we support him and we support the efforts of the attorneys who are trying to uncover the fraud so that our American liberties and the preservation of the integrity of our elections continues from this point forward, because otherwise we no longer have a republic.
There's a lot of patriots. There was a silent majority before. We're no longer silent.
I'm watching that. Way to go, Yorba Linda. That brings back, Tim, great memories for me when I ran in 2010 and the Tea Party was in force. And I believe that one statement that lady made right there at the end is, we can't be silent anymore.
Yeah. That was the phrase you heard a lot during the election cycle about the silent majority, but we can't be silent anymore. And you've heard the senator talk about it today. The longer we're silent, the more they'll be able to do the kinds of things they've been doing. In fact, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi and Democrat colleagues might have lost a number of House seats, but you would never know it. In fact, the Washington Times is reporting Pelosi is now telling her Senate colleagues from across the aisle how to run their shop. The Speaker says she wants the Senate to hold hearings before the next president is sworn in. On Monday, Joe Biden talked about who he intends to nominate for a number of national security and foreign policy positions. And it's kind of the same old for them, isn't it?
A lot of the same faces from the Obama days are in there.
Yeah.
But you know what I'm liking is, you have the squad or whatever.
Right.
And now there's a lot of Republican women that are getting in there, and they're making a Republican squad.
Good.
So it's going to be interesting to see what happens. President Trump's on a roll when it comes to getting judges confirmed. According to the ChristianHeadlines.com, this week the Senate confirmed President Trump's 225th federal judge, a modern record for GOP presidents. Before it's all said and done, the number jumped up to 227 judges confirmed. Here's the breakdown. 168 district judges, 53 appeals court judges, 3 Supreme Court justices, and finally, 3 members of the U.S. Court of International Trade. Now, Senator, this is important that we have these kind of judges in there if this thing's going to end up in the courts, isn't it?
It's very important. And what was also very important was a realignment of the Supreme Court justices.
So
that they were aligned now with the battleground states. So now we have Judge Kavanaugh instead of, I think it was, who was it? Let me just, one of the justices that we did not want. I think it was Kagan or Kagan.
Kagan is now on the Ninth Circuit Court on the West Coast, so she oversees that one now.
Although the Ninth Circuit's been more conservative lately, so I don't, anyway. But they're not in a battleground stage. The bottom line, and so Kagan's out, Kavanaugh's in for Michigan at least, and that tells you that there's some maneuvering and getting ready for the U.S. Supreme Court playing a major role in the final outcome of this election.
Yeah. Well, speaking of judges ruling or not ruling, there will be no investigation into the mob that attacked Senator Rand Paul and his wife as they left the White House on August 27th. The senator made the announcement on Monday in a social media post. Paul said the U.S. attorney, the District of Columbia, informed him on Monday that whoever organized and funded the thugs would not be looked into.
Well, I don't think you have to look very far. Figure it out pretty easily who it is. I mean, when they're pre-positioning baseball bats and different things,
Yeah.
frozen
Yeah.
water bottles.
Right.
When there are food trucks there for the protesters. That's what I've got planned. If anybody, and of course, I'm in Texas, it's not going to happen.
Yeah.
But if anybody knocked on my door this Thanksgiving and asked what we're doing, we're having a
Funeral for your
pro-
turkey.
What's a funeral for a turkey and because you can have 30
funerals
people.
are outlawed too. You got to be careful.
Oh, they are? That's in Michigan.
Yeah.
Well, there you go. We're having a peaceful protest over the death of a turkey in my house. So that's what we're doing. Nothing to see here, right? Star Wars is becoming true. Nothing to see here. All right, let me get back to reality here a second. Religious leaders in New Jersey are asking the Supreme Court for relief from the pandemic-related restrictions involving houses of worship. According to the Epoch Times, attorneys representing a Roman Catholic priest and an Orthodox Jewish rabbi have filed an emergency application with the High Court. The suit claims that New Jersey Governor Phil Murphy is using discriminatory actions, abusing religious freedom in his handling of this pandemic. Currently, New Jersey limits houses of worship to 25% of capacity. All right. The suit points out that other essential places are allowed to be open at 100% capacity. Earlier requests for relief in the lower courts were denied. That's why this one is being pushed up to the Supreme Court.
Yeah, Senator, there in your state, of course, your governor likes to make a lot of different rulings and edicts there. How are your people dealing with that up there?
Well, we're going to church, and they initially, her initial ruling back on March 23rd stated that church worship could not go on, and so she immediately got greeted by some lawsuits that discouraged her from that position. And actually, within 24 hours, she had backed off of that position. Technically, what she did is she removed the penalty for coming together, but she still made it illegal to go off and do it. And a lot of churches in the state, frankly, just abided by it. I mean, at our heart, Christians in particular, we're rule followers, right?
Mm-hmm.
If the government tells us to do something, we go off and do it. I mean, we're all they start quoting Romans 13 all the time. But I'll tell you, we're at the stage right now where I think we need to act a little bit more like Acts chapter 4 and go off and say, guys, I know what you're telling me to do, but am I going to serve God or am I going to serve you? And I know what my answer is going to be on that. And I'm happy to say my church is, once we've reopened, we've stayed open, and no amount of intimidation appears to be shutting us down here. So, and John MacArthur, I want to still give shout out for him back out in California for his stand on it. Because it's one thing if you're a small church going off and taking that stand. It's another thing if you're one of the bigger ones. And I've noticed the courage factor is inversely proportional to the size of the congregation sometimes.
Yeah, I'm reminded a couple other scriptures. I remember when Jesus turned over some tables one time in the temple. That was not looked upon very fondly by the elite, but he did it.
No.
And I remember another time where Paul appealed to Caesar. He said, wait a minute, I've got legal standing here. So he used the court system, if you would, in that. Before we go, I'd like to touch base with you again, and I want to get people to understand that you said in your testimony, you testified yesterday, that something did happen in this election with ballots.
Yeah, I didn't get that in the testimony yesterday, but I highlighted that the chain of custody, I've been talking about this for quite a while, has been broken in our elections. And it's not just here in Michigan. Every single state, especially the battleground states, needs to look at the chain of custody. Now, I've got a story on what I mean by that exactly at letsfixstuff.org. It talks about the 2020 election being the worst game of telephone ever. If you remember what that is, where you whisper to the person next to you and you hopefully get the same message at the tail end of it. That's what chain of custody is all about in this election. And the qualified voter bones connected to the poll book bone, connected to the ballot bone, connected to the vote tally bone. If you're breaking any of the links in that chain, you've got reason to suspect the integrity of that election. And I'll tell you, I know in Michigan where that breakage is responsible for at least hundreds of thousands of votes being either tossed out or mismanaged. And when the court cases come forward, all the really good evidence that we have is going to demonstrate all of that. And
so there was an algorithm, right? There was an algorithm, and there's proof of that in the vote.
Yep.
Okay, and then now you got to show who was implementing that, right? That's the case.
Yeah.
That's the trial part of that.
Right, exactly. We got to show specifically how in the software was it enabled, and we're hot on that trail right now and putting it together with a bunch of forensics experts.
So this happened before the election and election day.
Yeah, and now it's happening after, thanks to the media censoring all this and essentially enabling what appears to be a sedition or attempt to overturn us.
And that's something we didn't even speak about when we talked. We haven't even talked about Twitter and Facebook and Google and all of that with the censor. It's just a coordinated effort all the way around. Let me ask you one thing before we go real quickly. What is the average Christian that's watching this? What can they do now? What do we do?
You got to pray. I mean, everybody says it. It's not trite. I've seen God work in so many amazing ways. And I know for a fact, God has never, ever let me down. He's not really, I can't say the opposite way is true, but God has never let me down. And we don't necessarily get what we want or what we say we want, but we get what we need. And I'll tell you, it's been a long time since Christians have been, accepting being pushed out of the public square for quite a long time. What's happening right now is that Christians are standing up and saying this is wrong. They're providing the evidence. I'm working with Christians all across the country that are knitting together all these puzzle pieces into the picture that's eventually going to prove that this election was stolen. So keep the faith, everybody. Get on your knees.
Amen.
And God's got this.
Senator Patrick Colbeck, thank you, sir, so much. And I'm going to ask everyone to pray for you, sir, and what you're doing. And don't forget, we'll be back here this afternoon, 5 Eastern, 4 Central Time. Don't miss Flashpoint tonight with Gene Bailey, Hank Kuhneman, Mario Murillo, and Lance Wallnau. Tim?
Been a great day. Been a great day.
Been a great day.
Yeah.
We'll see you later this afternoon with more on Victory Update.
God bless everybody.